A lot of people ask why I focus primarily on the issues in Latin America and South America. Well, much like the issue with the Fitzgerald and the McCain, after the mainstream media put out their story, nobody questioned them. Nobody looked into it further, and I was the only channel doing it. I see that same paradigm here, that the mainstream media puts out a story that these are all just a bunch of horrible, terrible, criminal people that we don't have any respect for, and we should do everything we can to keep them from coming here. And that's the story. And then they move on without any other coverage whatsoever. So while I guess I have the ability to, I'm going to cover the issues down here in depth just because there's no one else doing it. And I serve down here. So I'm not, I guess, a world expert on it, but I know a little bit about it. But today we're going to talk about Guatemala. You see, this issue with the volcano and all the problems coming out of that little country is a great tool we can use to show how sometimes what we think will be the effect of our actions isn't necessarily always the effect of our actions. Now, this is a story about Puerto Rico, and I covered this yesterday, and their desire to want to be independent. But there's something in this article I think is critical, and I think that most listeners would recognize. Let's see if I can zoom in here to just make it a little easier to read for you. All right, so basically the idea is this. The UN entity charged with ending colonialism in the world referred to the inalienable right of the Puerto Rican people to be independent and make their own decisions in cases such as the recent natural disaster. Now, the guy who has led this made a very interesting comment. The United States, and this is the second paragraph down here, wants the cage, but not the pigeons. From the first moment that the U.S. government invaded and occupied the island, one of its main objectives was to depopulate the territory, destroy our culture, our identity, and our language. Now, does that sound like something the United States government would be capable of? A depopulation agenda? The destruction of a culture? The destruction of personal identity and language? It sounds like something the U.S. would be very capable of to me. And that pretty much sums it up in a nutshell. But you're asking, well, what does this have to do with Guatemala? Well, when the U.S. practices this and they decide they want to not have anything more to do with a certain culture or race when they can't have their way, other people step in. Now, this is a story here about a little country down in South America named Bolivia. Bolivia has a governmental system much like what Venezuela is aspiring to. In fact, in more ways, they are communist and socialist than Venezuela's ever been. Yet they don't have violence. They don't have drug use much. They don't have the huge social upheaval and problems that we see in places like Colombia and Peru and Mexico and all of these other places that are more quote-unquote U.S. friendly. And they're sending 50 tons of aid to Guatemala. And I think, well, that's not very much, but they're not a very big country. See, here's the GDP of Bolivia, and here's the GDP of the United States. 19 times greater. So it would be the equivalent of the U.S. sending 950 tons of aid. And there's other players getting involved too. This is the Emiratis. And let's see here, 19 June 2018. The OPEC Fund for International Development, OFID, has approved a U.S. $100,000 emergency aid grant to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. See, this is what's going to happen down here. As the U.S. pulls away, and the U.S. continues to denigrate and put down and marginalize all of these countries down here simply based on their culture, which is what is the impression now, which is what's going on. Mark my words. When we refer to the people that come here as an infestation, they're going to take it only one way. And no one is saying, well, Hondurans are, but Nicaraguans aren't, or Guatemalans are better or worse, or they're not talking about that. What they're talking about is the entire region of Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to the tip of Chile. They're going to take this one way, and their governments will react to it accordingly. And we're starting to see the effects of it. And when Obrador takes power in Mexico, you mark my words, I've mentioned this before, but watch the elections in Mexico. When Obrador takes over, he is shoulder to shoulder with Maduro. And that's going to trickle down right through here. And that's why I say there's going to be a war. Because even Panama has moved toward China. Puerto Rico will definitely move toward China if they have their independence. We know what Cuba is. Right, literally off the tip of Florida right here, we will have nothing but Russian and Chinese influence. And not just influence, basically control. See, it's not that I ever made the allegation that all of these people coming here were wonderful and nice and sweet and all full of light and wonderfulness, but you do have to understand that the U.S. is their biggest customer. These drug cartels, these people growing and selling this stuff, they come here because there's money. I've made a couple of polls, and if no one's seen those, in the community tab of your YouTube page, you can put out a poll. And I've talked about this, I've tried to illustrate this idea that they come here for cash. And eventually those two roads are going to meet, where they realize that a good way to get rid of the illegal influx into this country is to get rid of the use of cash. Because they do. They come here and they work for cash and don't pay income taxes. Most of them. Some do, but a lot of them don't. And if you would restrict the use of cash, restrict the amount you could get out of an ATM, or how much you could buy in public without providing an ID, I think you would see a huge difference. Because during 2008, when we had our crisis, the whole bank meltdown thing, illegal immigration went down precipitously. They were doing better in Mexico financially than they would have done here, because there weren't guys paying cash for anything anymore. Nobody had it. And, you know, this has been how the U.S. has, in a nutshell, decided to deal with the drug problem. Is just to say, stop being a loser. Not realizing what pumping Percocet and oxycodone and all this crap into a society for 20, 30, 50 years does. It's not a matter of just saying, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore. And this is actually a really great article on Quora about this. What I'm basically saying here is that the U.S. is complicit in the reason those people are coming here. Their ability to do what they do down there, those cartels, they didn't learn on their own. They learned from big, like Monsanto and the big corporations that went down there and taught these people how to grow massive, massive amounts and how to refine it. That wasn't something that was even known how to do in the 1930s, 1920s down there. It wasn't a problem. They didn't have the ability to do it. It was big U.S. corporations that gave them the ability to do it. And still to this day, do this thing. I mean, I don't care where you go. I mean, you can look at it on left-wing media. You can look at it at right-wing media. That, you know, there are more drug users illicit drug users in the United States than there are people in Venezuela. Think about that for a minute. And later on today, we're going to do our top secret briefing on Patreon. And what we're going to talk about is how each of these levels has a corresponding political belief to it. And what we'll show is that right up here, it even gives you a hint right here of what is at the very, very top. And how you start down here believing one thing, then go to another, and then go to another, and you can track it. You can track someone's political beliefs by where they fall on the Maslow's hierarchy. So that'll be our top secret briefing on Patreon today. So, anyway, I just wanted folks to just keep some things in mind as this story progresses and they talk about all of the issues. That as we pull away, there will be those folks that are going to be ready to step in and take our place and take advantage. And we're going to have to need to be prepared for that. And that the depopulation agenda isn't a new thing. Like, share, subscribe.